Hopefully we're live. Hi, Kristin. How are you?
Hey, hi, lovely people.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Greenwood. I'm with Analytics 8, and we are live on LinkedIn today to talk about data governance. I am joined by Kristin Feedback, my colleague. Want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Kristin Feedback. I am new to Analytics 8, and I am on the delivery side. So it's nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. So one of the things we're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff today. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is, so I post a lot on LinkedIn.
I get tagged in it a lot.
I know. Listen, I have a lot of things I want to share. So one of the things that I recently posted, and it surprised me how much feedback I received, was one of the most basic things about data governance. We were talking about, what's the difference between a data catalog, a business glossary, and a data dictionary? That's like foundational data governance. And were you surprised at how many comments I got on that?
I mean, I wasn't. When we were talking about it afterwards, it's just, that's one of the biggest questions that I get when I'm working with my different clients. And it's honestly some of the longest pieces of how do we build out this data catalog? How do we build out these different glossary portions? Those take up a lot more time than actually standing up any of the software itself. It's just meeting with those people and gathering these ideas.
It does, but I've been doing this for a couple decades now. And a data dictionary is not something that should be new to anybody. We've been talking about it for years, at least in IT. I think business is now becoming more aware of what those data dictionaries are, as all the applications today come with them, your ERPs, your CRMs, and all the other technologies that you're procuring. But I was very surprised. So some of the comments that got me there, like specifically around the business glossary, is I think people are confusing a business glossary with a data catalog, and they're different. They have very different purposes, but there are platforms or technology that support both, and then even more on top of that. And I know obviously, we both come from Informatica, so you've worked with their cloud data governance catalog, which does a little bit of everything. But I found that one probably the most surprising, is that the difference between the business glossary and
and as technologies evolve, they've become a lot more integrated, so it is a bit harder to separate the pieces. But those are two very separate items that you need to build out in order for them to be functional. But even if you can use them separately, you don't need a data catalog with your business glossary, and you don't need your business glossary with your data catalog. It makes things a lot better. But if you just have only time to start one, you can do that.
Yeah. Well, and if I'm asked, if someone's asking me what should I start with, I always suggest a data catalog. I think at the minimum, you should have an inventory of your data assets. You should know what data exists within your organization. And even probably more importantly, it is more important for regulated industries. So finance, healthcare, higher ed, you've got to be able to respond to audits. You've got all kinds of regulatory bodies watching over you. And if you don't have an inventory of the most, your most basic asset, which is your data assets, then I think you're going to be in some trouble. So that's one of the use cases I've seen for a data catalog. What's a couple you've
Yeah, so definitely the classifications with data catalogs. More and more what I'm seeing with them is needing to have the assets that they need for either data democratization. So which items can you use to show the rest of your company, or even utilize to sell outside? And that gets to be in a bit more where you're trying to mix a bit of your data privacy with that democratization. And then the next piece of it is AI, like just trying to connect and know what data is needed and improving on it. You need to know where it is in order to know what to improve.
That's right. Okay. So you're going to catalog your inventory, but then you're going to tag it so that you have it classified, and you can actually, if you have an audit, I hope you don't, but if you are audited, you have a way to search and find the information that falls under those specific categories that are being audited, like PI or PI or whatever they
may be. And certainly you can use those classifications, not just that, but and also define your data that you may not know, because internally you may have your own types of classifications. And then you can use that language to help sort of find like your different IDs that you try to use, if you use them in a sort of a more regular pattern that is more for an internal audit rather than for an external one as well.
That's right. Yeah. So again, back to basics. The data catalog, the inventory is a great place to start. Data dictionaries are a no-brainer. You and I have had the debate that, it's an IT thing, because I try to differentiate for people to make it simple. Data dictionaries are IT, business glossaries are business, but But you and I've had this debate and you've kind of corrected me, and you're right. You're right. So why don't you explain to the audience your opinion on this?
So it's my belief that one of the most common misconceptions with the data catalog is that it's for IT and that it's the IT's definition of the data. When in fact, it's really the software's data, like the software's definition of the data. Why was it created and what's that software using it for? Whereas IT will have their own business definition of what they're using the data for in other sort of categories. So there is a differentiation, and it's probably one that's grown. Like it probably was fairly close, like probably a decade back, because a lot of the uses were very the same.
Yeah.
But now that we've expanded the use of what we can do with data, those definitions have diverged. So now like IT has become a part of that business glossary.
Yeah, they absolutely have. And so that point, and then the other point on that is if you think about it from a data literacy perspective, what we're seeing within our business, the different business units or lines of business, is they're becoming more data literate. So they are able to look at a data dictionary and make some sense of it as well. So, as we start to raise our maturity, or our data governance maturity starts to, we start to elevate and move further towards that, if you're on a 1 to 5 curve, moving towards the 3 to 4, it's possible that the business would also use a data dictionary. But ideally, they're using a business.
Correct. It is ideal if they use the business glossary. But there have been some cases where I've worked with the business, and this one is especially true with finances. FP&A has become a lot bigger. With those reporting and analytics, they are having to sort of look at what that data dictionary definition is, so they can make sure it's as accurate as possible, because those numbers tend to go public. So they can't just use what they consider it to be. They have to use what it truly is.
So let's talk about something that happened recently with one of our clients. Let's talk about the scenario where they're developing their business glossary, and they have a term. It's vendor. Vendor was the term. And we just needed a single definition. We wanted a single definition of vendor. And after, I don't know, at least an hour with maybe 5 or 6 people on the call, we still hadn't defined a single definition for vendor, because there were actually, what was it, 6 that we uncovered? So go ahead and talk everyone through that one, because I just thought this was fascinating how quickly something that should be so simple became very difficult, and is probably why business glossaries are what customers consider very difficult.
And it also doesn't help that vendor itself is already a term that comes with 2 definitions globally. So you can have your more supplier definition of where you're receiving materials from if you're in manufacturing, or your distributor, someone who's distributing your products. So it's already coming with those 2 base definitions. But then within there, if you add in payments, you're like, okay, if we're adding in sort of payment aspect of this definition, what does this now become? Do our employees become vendors? Does the government become a part of our vendors because we're paying taxes? And then it starts to morph into sort of where they've been storing it. But these different pieces are being used for very different purposes. The employee data is not being used in the same data for procurement. So that's where these definitions have become into multiple different parts. And it is great. We were able to get down to what that one true definition was for this use case. But this also goes into what you're trying to define it for. Like, what is your use case that you're trying to create these business glossaries for? Because it's normal to have multiple definitions, and it's fine. You just need to know what it's used, which systems it's now touching, and where it should truly belong in the long term. Because it may be all in one system now, but as you expand your program, should it be separated out? And you just have to ask these continuous questions.
You do, and then you have to have this space within the glossary to create the multiple definitions for vendor. So you may have a term that's vendor, and it has a business definition that has specific meaning, but then you might have supplier vendor or other, the other 6 that they had identified. And that's okay. That's what business glossaries do. They allow you to build these hierarchies and these different models to be able to support that. And I don't know that people realize that. I think sometimes they try to just do this manually in Excel, and I get it. It used to be really expensive to leverage the tech out there. In fact, if you go back and Google me, maybe don't do that, but if you were to, you'd see some videos where I actually talked about don't buy the technology, make sure you have the people to process, use Excel, use SharePoint, use Wiki, make sure people are going to buy into this before you do it. But I've changed my tune, because the tech has come so far that now it's more plug and play. It's SaaS solution based. So you're not making these big investments up front. and it's super user friendly. So
software that you use for everything else, like Power BI, Salesforce even, these all come, you can create your own business glossaries within there. You can define those fields. And a lot of times people will confuse this part again with the data dictionary. Like they pull it in from Salesforce, like, oh, this is our data dictionary that we have within Salesforce. But in truth, it's what the business has now applied to be as that definition when they hover over that field. So it's built up what a business glossary is, and it's a lot more accessible now. And it's not just completely isolated technologies too. And you can integrate SharePoint with a bunch of different things. It's just how are you going to do it?
Yeah, so thinking about those folks that maybe still use business objects, BobJ, Cognos, Tableau, Power BI, the hover over function, when you're hovering over is what you're seeing is the metadata, and the metadata should be the business term. It should not be the data dictionary term. It should be the business term, something that was defined by someone that understands the SME of the data, what we call data owners, what's managed and maintained by stewards. That's what you should be seeing when you hover over, and that's truly what the business terms are. So it's a great feature. I mean, it's been built into this text. And I can tell you 15, 20 years ago with business objects, we had that functionality. So we were able to, within the semantic layer, just build in the definition. So the hover over would work when you're looking at a report or dashboard. But it's coming even further now where you can log into an entire platform that provides the data dictionary, the business glossary, data lineage. It's the whole shebang. So that's an example because we both come from Informatica. Is there Informatica's data management platform, IDMC? If you log in, you have all these different capabilities at your fingertips now that you didn't in the past to see things like data lineage and dictionaries and business glossaries, all things that help you with your
reporting. And just to circle back a bit, because one of the comments has reminded me of something, is a lot of times you can find your start of a business glossary and just a list of terms and definitions that interns have collected. When they're trying to onboard as quickly as possible, they're writing a lot of this information down just so when they're trying to talk to people, they know what's being said to them. And sometimes that also happens with a lot of new employees as well. You can usually find the start of your business glossaries in some of those Excel sheets, some of those Word documents as well.
I mean, frankly, that's a great use case for why you should have one and why you should invest in the platform is, we do have turnover today. That's just the reality. The Great Recession. What was it? The Great Recession that happened recently? But people are moving around more. It's, people don't stay in their same job forever. And so a lot of that tribal knowledge that we used to rely on is being lost. And this is a great way to just maintain it and force the people that are in your organization to comply by having policies and then making sure they adhere to the policies where if you're a data owner and you're responsible for a certain set of data, you're maintaining it, you're owning it, you're responding to it. I think that's just being a good data citizen, but I don't know that everyone feels that way. So I think it's probably important to have first the policy in place and then the technologies.
And it was, as Ken just said in the comments, it was the great resignations.
Oh, not recession. Yeah. I mean, hopefully no recession's coming.
I hope.
I don't know. I just freaked out everyone on LinkedIn. I don't know anything about a recession. Yeah, the great resignation. So tribal knowledge. Another use case. So I've run across this a few times too, and tools like Elation are great for this. And I'm tool agnostic, so I'm just throwing out different technologies I've worked with. But a good example for why you would want to inventory your data. If you are looking to move from on-prem to the cloud, which 99% of companies are, you're trying to move all your workloads, your data loads, everything over to the cloud. You have to decide, are you going to do a lift and shift and just move everything and then pay for everything to be processed, even if you're not using it and it may not even be needed? Or are you going to be more thoughtful? Are you going to actually inventory your assets, look at the usage, survey the data that needs to be moved and the workloads that need to be moved over and shift those over and leave everything else in on-prem storage that may be, not as expensive to maintain and you're not dealing with processing and maintenance. So I've seen that use case repeatedly, especially with my Elation customers.
Yeah, and especially too, in a lot of the cloud platforms, even just for maintaining assets that you've already moved in the cloud or just have created there to start. They were never in on-prem, but were created in the cloud. There are different ways to store your data based off of that usage. So you do want to look at some of those usage statistics of those data. So you can move it into some of those lower cost areas that are a bit harder to access, but it costs your company a lot less.
Well, and again, back to the platform concept. If you can see who's using what data and they're accessing it, you can also do more impact analysis. So if you need to make a change or you're going to have to make a change for whatever reason, you can very quickly log in and see who's been using it and what the impact would be. We didn't have that kind of availability of resources before. We had to either guess or kind of know based on tribal knowledge. So that's another awesome benefit of the data governance technologies that are out there today.
And as someone was also coming, it's like, as you're building these up, and especially as we're talking a lot about tools and technology today, there is that big human aspect of it and trying to make these decisions. So as you're sort of talking with people and trying to decide what that one true definition is, or what should that standard definition be, that's going to be a process of probably first meeting with people individually, sort of getting a sense of what that room is like, how sort of susceptible to change are some people, and how excited they are about it, because they may not necessarily know what you're doing. A lot of times you don't want to go and say, oh, hey, we're doing data governance, we're going to implement these policies. No, a lot of times you just sort of want to gut check and sort of see, like, what are some of these pain points that you're having? And you're like, oh, I heard you say this. What do you mean by that? Just trying to collect that information so you can store that for later. And then when you have the ability to just be able to bring people into a room and talk about it, sort of see what people will say when talking about their different definitions. And that's when a lot of some of these fun exercises can go. And back to when we were on that vendor conversation, one of the things that I just had with one of my coworkers when this was brought up is like someone who is paid. It's like, she brought up paying government tax. I'm like, but then do you consider government an entity? You start asking a bunch of these different questions, and it just has that snowball effect and makes things a lot easier.
Exactly. But it's worth it. It's worth documenting it. I know it takes time, and I know it's an effort, and I realize that there's cost associated with bringing people together and having these conversations. But if you have them and you do it, and you get a baseline, if you get your baseline catalog with your key terms, your critical data elements defined, you've done something. You started somewhere. You can start to say, I am doing governance. If you get audited, you can point back to an exercise that, hey, we've started the process. We may not be as far along as you'd like us to be for various reasons, but we've started the process, so you can at least respond. Also, again, to the use case of having onboarding new employees, but also just reducing inefficiencies where, you could be an employee of tenure. You've been there, I don't know, 15, 20 years, but you still don't know how to get to certain access of information. It's a quick way to search. It's like a Google search for your company to find the data assets that you might need to leverage. So I don't know. Obviously I'm a fan of data governance, but these are some of the reasons why and why I'm so passionate about this. And why
and just to add in one last thing with the data lineage aspect, because that's now very common in data catalogs. That wasn't there first. A lot of times there was a lot of business relationship diagrams, but data lineage has become a really big part of catalogs now. And I think that's great. As someone who used to have to draw data lineage out by hand, it's amazing that I don't have to do that. Sometimes I still have to do a little bit more digging if I'm trying to sort of figure out like little pieces of code that might be making some changes, but just sort of having that sense of what's touching and where, I know where to start looking. So I don't have to go and dig through 500 different lines and maybe 4 different folders of C# code to see where a greater than sign exists when there should be a less than sign.
Yeah, and if you're a business analyst, you may not even have access to that. You might not be able to just query the database directly and go looking and fishing. So having the ability as a business analyst now to be able to say, what we used to have to do in the ETL tools, right, is go and kind of see where the transformations happen. You can just see it in these new platforms. And it's a beautiful thing because, again, back to not just business terms, you can also not completely understand your source data. So if you're looking at a dashboard or you're looking at a report, you're consuming it and you're making a bunch of assumptions because the metadata is not on that dashboard or report to tell you the source of it, that can be a big problem. You could be making decisions based on information that you should not be making decisions on. So that's where having the metadata is important. That's where having the ability to look at the lineage and kind of gut check, like, oh, I know that source. That's our ERP system. I'm comfortable with that. Or it's our data warehouse system. I already know that's been certified. Just having that confidence as an analyst, that's amazing. And it's efficient. It's so much faster than, putting in a ticket with IT, asking the questions, and it's less risky than making a decision that maybe you should.
And then being able to overlay that business glossary on top of that lineage and just seeing where these definitions are touching. You might say, oh, hey, they are using this data incorrectly. Let's redirect them to another place and use the catalog to point them. Or look at the process like, we built this process for this definition under the assumption that it meant something else. We should probably rework this and sort of discuss on how that process is going to be moving forward. So
Yeah, and the cool thing with the technology is that workflow in a lot of cases is built in. So if you're an analyst and you go in and you do your Google search within your platform, within your tool, your data governance tool, you identify the term, you look at the lineage and you see that problem, you can put in a ticket or like a comment right in there so that it gets automatically routed. It's dependent on the technology you're using, but automatically routes to the owner of that data, who can then either respond or can call you however they want to deal with it. Maybe it's just a quick answer. But I love those workflows are now built in. I mean, this technology's come so far. I think it's worth looking into if you haven't.
And that doesn't mean to say that you need the technology. You can use some simple tools that are free to just draw out some of that lineage and then take the definitions that you gathered when building it out and just posting it somewhere that people can see it. So probably in an easy link on your internal SharePoint site or any sort of intranet that you have. Just someplace that's really accessible for people to look and start seeing and using.
Yeah, just to get them in, like, exercising that data governance muscle, because this all comes back to, this is data governance. This is why data governance exists. This is why it's important. It's, you're going to be able to reduce inefficiencies. You're going to improve, or you're going to be able to respond to audits and regulatory requirements. I mean, there's just endless reasons why data governance is important. And we've talked about a few. The other use case around, if you're moving your data assets to the cloud, being really thoughtful and considerate about what you move. So you're not spending more money when you move to the cloud than you need to be on processing and maintenance. I mean, we could go on all day, and I would, but we're about 23 minutes in, and I feel like we've had a great conversation, and I'm so pleased. I hope we had a lot of people join us today, but this is recorded, so hopefully people can listen to it later. Kristin, I know that it's lunchtime, and if we're anything alike, I think we both need to probably go eat. So I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, and we're going to go have lunch.
Feel free to just message us if you have any questions. We're really easy to talk to. I hope, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely ping us on LinkedIn, and we'll respond with any additional questions.
Thanks, Sia.
Kristin, have a nice lunch. Take care.